The obese girl was locked outside the feast until the mountain man broke down the door. The autumn wind swept through Farewell with the promise of winter close behind. It was late October in the year 1873, and the small frontier town nestled in the Montana Territory hummed with anticipation. Tomorrow night would bring the annual harvest feast, a tradition as old as the settlement itself. Every family contributed their finest dishes, and the entire town gathered in the old meeting hall to celebrate another year survived in this unforgiving land. Nora Whitfield sat by her window, watching the townspeople hurry past with their preparations. At 23 years old, she had learned to make herself small, despite her considerable size. The daughter of the town's late blacksmith, she had inherited his sturdy build and amplified it, her frame carrying extra weight that drew whispers and cruel jokes from neighbors who should have known better. "There goes the glutton's daughter," she'd heard them say after her father died 5 years ago, "eating herself into an early grave, just like old Samuel." But Nora had also inherited her mother's gift for baking. Catherine Whitfield had been renowned throughout the territory for her pastries before consumption took her when Nora was just 12. In the years since her father's passing, Nora had perfected her mother's recipes, adding her own touches, creating confections that made her small kitchen smell like heaven itself. This year she had decided would be different. This year she would attend the harvest feast with her head held high, carrying a basket of the finest apple tarts she had ever made. The apples had come from the widow Henderson's tree, traded for mending work Nora had done. The butter and cream she had saved for weeks. Each tart was a masterpiece. The crust golden and flaky, the filling spiced with cinnamon she'd carefully hoarded since the last supply wagon came through. As darkness fell on the evening of the feast, Nora, dressed in her best gown, a deep burgundy dress that her mother had made, let out several times over the years to accommodate Nora's changing figure. She arranged her dark hair as neatly as she could, pinning it back with her mother's tortoiseshell combs. Then, with hands that trembled only slightly, she picked up the basket of tarts, covered with a clean white cloth. The walk to the meeting hall took only 10 minutes, but each step felt like a mile. Nora could hear the laughter and music spilling from the building's windows, see the warm glow of lamplight painting golden squares on the dirt street. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She climbed the 3 wooden steps to the entrance, where Thomas Garrett, the general store owner, stood guard at the door. His job was to welcome guests and ensure everyone signed the registry. When he saw Nora, his jovial expression soured like milk left in the sun. "Evening, Miss Whitfield," he said, his voice cold. "I'm afraid you've misunderstood the nature of tonight's gathering." Nora's stomach twisted. "I brought tarts, apple tarts, to contribute to the feast." Thomas glanced at the basket, then back at her face, his lip curling. "Nobody wants food from someone like you, Miss Whitfield. Folks might wonder if there'd be anything left after you'd been in the kitchen with it." He chuckled at his own cruelty. "Best you head on home." "But I've never missed—" "Times change," Thomas interrupted. "The community has standards to maintain. Good evening." He stepped back inside and pulled the heavy oak door shut. Nora heard the bolt slide home with a finality that made her chest ache. She stood there, frozen, as laughter erupted from within. Someone had told a joke. Someone was clapping. Life continued inside while she remained locked outside in the gathering cold. Nora's eyes burned, but she refused to let the tears fall. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. She turned to descend the steps, clutching her basket, when the sound of hoofbeats made her look up. A lone rider approached through the darkness, sitting tall on a massive roan stallion. Even in the dim light, Nora could see he was a big man, dressed in buckskins and furs, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face, a mountain man, clearly returning from the high country. She moved to the side of the steps to let him pass, assuming he'd tie his horse and join the festivities inside. Instead, he reined in his horse right in front of the hall and dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who spent more time in the saddle than on foot. He was taller than she'd thought, broad-shouldered, with a thick, dark beard and eyes that caught the lamplight from the windows. "Evening," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "You waitin' to go in?" Nora swallowed hard. "No, I was just leaving." He glanced at her basket, then at the closed door, then back at her face. His expression sharpened. "They holdin' the feast in there?" "Yes." "And you're not invited?" The kindness in his question broke something loose in her chest. "I brought these," she whispered, pulling back the cloth to show him the perfect golden tarts. "But they said nobody wants food from someone like me." The mountain man's jaw tightened. In the lamplight, Nora could see his eyes had gone dark as a winter storm. "Is that right?" He took the basket gently from her hands and set it on the steps. "What's your name?" "Nora. Nora Whitfield." "Well, Miss Whitfield, my name is James Morgan, and I think we ought to correct a misunderstanding." Before Nora could ask what he meant, James strode up the steps to the door and hammered on it with his fist. When no one answered, or perhaps they were choosing to ignore the knocking, he took 2 steps back, raised his leg, and drove his boot into the door with tremendous force. The bolt splintered, the door crashed inward, slamming against the interior wall with a bang that silenced every voice in the crowded hall. James picked up Nora's basket, then extended his other hand to her. "Come on." Nora's heart pounded so hard she thought it might escape her chest. But she placed her hand in his, rough and warm and steady, and let him lead her into the hall. Every eye turned to them. The fiddler's bow froze mid-stroke. Thomas Garrett stood near the refreshment table, his face drained of color. The mayor, Edmund Price, stepped forward, his expression caught between outrage and uncertainty. "What is the meaning of this?" Mayor Price demanded. James walked straight to the main table, Nora's hand still clasped in his. He set the basket down with deliberate care, then turned to face the assembly. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the room. "This lady brought food to share at your feast. Fine food, made with her own hands, and your man at the door turned her away like she was trash." His gaze swept across the crowd, and several people looked down at their feet. "Where I come from, we judge a person by their character and their deeds, not by how they look. Maybe you folks have forgotten that out here." Thomas Garrett found his voice. "Now see here, you can't just—" "I just did," James cut him off. "And unless someone here has objections, Miss Whitfield is going to enjoy this feast like any other citizen of this town. Are there any objections?" Silence, heavy and absolute. "Good." James pulled back the cloth covering the tarts. The scent of apples and cinnamon and buttery pastry filled the air. "She cooks better than anyone here. Guarantee it." Mrs. Henderson, the apple tree owner, stepped forward tentatively. She was a widow herself, and perhaps that gave her courage the others lacked. She picked up one of the tarts and took a bite. Her eyes widened. "Lord have mercy," she breathed. "This is Nora, this is magnificent." Others came forward then, encouraged by Mrs. Henderson's reaction. Hands reached for the tarts. Exclamations of surprise and pleasure rippled through the crowd. Within minutes, the basket was empty, and people were asking Nora if she might make more for the general store to sell. James watched it all with satisfaction, then turned to Nora. "I'll leave you to enjoy your evening, Miss Whitfield." "Wait," Nora said, catching his arm. "I don't know how to thank you." He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "No thanks needed. Just keep making those tarts, and maybe save me one next time." "Next time?" "I pass through Farewell every few months, trading furs, picking up supplies. I'll look for you." Then he was gone, striding back out into the night, leaving Nora standing in the hall that had tried to reject her, surrounded by people who were suddenly eager to speak with her. The following months transformed Nora's life. Mrs. Henderson helped her set up a small business baking tarts and pastries for sale. The widow had connections, and soon Nora was supplying the general store, the hotel, and even taking special orders for parties and celebrations. The income allowed her to keep her father's small house and build a proper baking kitchen in the back. But through it all, Nora thought of James Morgan. She caught herself watching the road into town, hoping to see a tall rider on a roan stallion. Winter came and went. Spring arrived with its muddy thaw, and then, on a warm May afternoon, he returned. Nora was in her kitchen, up to her elbows in bread dough, when she heard the knock at her door. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer it, expecting another customer. Instead, she found James standing on her porch, hat in hand, looking uncertain for the first time since she'd known him. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "I hope I'm not intruding." "Mr. Morgan." Nora felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Not at all. Please come in." He stepped inside, having to duck slightly to clear the doorframe. "I wanted to check on you, make sure things worked out after that night." "More than worked out." Nora gestured around her kitchen, filled with cooling racks and mixing bowls and the tools of her trade. "I have a business now, a real business, all because you gave me a chance." "You gave yourself a chance," James corrected. "Those tarts gave you a chance. I just kicked in a door." Nora laughed, and it felt good. "Well, I'm grateful for the door kicking. Can I offer you some coffee? And perhaps a tart? I saved one just in case you came back." His expression softened. "You did?" "I promised myself I would. Every batch I make, I set one aside for the man from the mountains." They sat at her small kitchen table, drinking coffee and talking. James told her about his life in the high country, trapping and trading, living off the land. He spoke of frozen peaks and crystal lakes, of grizzly bears and golden eagles, of solitude that could either drive a man mad or set him free. Nora told him about her parents, about learning to bake at her mother's side, about the loneliness of the years after her father died. She told him about the cruelty she'd endured, but also about the kindness she'd discovered in unexpected places. "Mrs. Henderson has been wonderful," Nora said. "She's taught me so much about running a business, and people actually smile at me now when they see me on the street." "They should have been smiling all along," James said quietly. "You're a remarkable woman, Nora Whitfield." No one had ever called her remarkable before. The word settled into her heart like a seed finding soil. James stayed in town for 3 days that visit, ostensibly to conduct his business with the trading post and general store. But he spent most of his time in Nora's kitchen, talking and laughing and helping her with her baking. He had strong hands that kneaded bread with surprising gentleness, and he didn't seem to mind getting flour on his buckskins. When he left, he promised to return before autumn. He kept that promise, and the next one, and the one after that. With each visit, James stayed a little longer. With each parting, Nora's heart broke a little more. She was falling in love with this mountain man who had crashed into her life like thunder, and she had no idea if he felt the same. 2 years passed. Nora's business flourished. She hired 2 assistants and expanded her kitchen. The mayor himself came to order pastries for his daughter's wedding. Thomas Garrett, who had turned her away from the feast, now bought her goods for his store and never met her eyes when he paid her. But Nora's greatest joy was always James's return. They had developed a rhythm, a friendship that felt like more, but had never quite become it. He would arrive in town, and they would fall into easy companionship. He helped her make repairs to her house. She mended his clothes and packed him supplies for his journeys. They took walks in the evening, talking about everything and nothing. It was October again, 3 years after the night of the harvest feast, when everything changed. James arrived in town looking haggard. His horse was limping, and he himself moved stiffly, favoring his left side. Nora took one look at him and ushered him inside, sitting him down at her table. What happened? Had a disagreement with a grizzly, James said, attempting a smile that came out as more of a grimace. The grizzly won. Let me see. He removed his shirt, revealing a torso mapped with scars from a hard life. Fresh claw marks raked across his ribs, stitched together with rough thread that was already showing signs of infection. Nora's breath caught. James Morgan, you stubborn fool, this needs proper doctoring. Already saw a doc up in Helena, just needs time to heal. Then you'll heal here. Nora's voice left no room for argument. I have a spare room. You're not going back to the mountains until those wounds are properly closed. James started to protest, then seemed to realize the futility. Yes, ma'am. For the next 3 weeks, James stayed in Nora's house. She tended his wounds, changed his bandages, made him broths and soft foods when chewing was too painful. She read to him from her mother's collection of books. They played cards and chess, and slowly, in the quiet intimacy of those days, something shifted between them. One evening, as Nora was checking his bandages, James caught her hand. Nora, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. Her heart hammered. What is it? I've been coming back to Farewell for 3 years now. At first I told myself it was for the trading, for the supplies. Then I told myself it was to check on you to make sure you were all right. He paused, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. But the truth is, I come back because I can't stay away. Because every day I'm in the mountains, I'm thinking about you, about your smile, about your strength, about the way you make me feel like I might belong somewhere after all. Nora's eyes filled with tears. James, I know I'm not much, he continued, words tumbling out now as if a dam had broken. I'm a rough man who lives a rough life. I don't have a fine house or steady income, but I love you, Nora Whitfield. I have loved you since that night I kicked in a door for you. And if you'll have me, I'd like to build a life here, with you. Not much. Nora laughed through her tears. James, you're everything. You saw me when everyone else looked away. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I love you too. I have for so long." He pulled her close, careful of his healing ribs, and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and tasted like coming home. They married that December in a small ceremony at the church with Mrs. Henderson as witness and half the town in attendance. Even Thomas Garrett came, though he still couldn't quite meet Nora's eyes. James sold most of his trapping equipment and used the money to help Nora expand her bakery into a proper shop. He still went to the mountains occasionally, but now he went for pleasure rather than survival. And he always came back within a few weeks, drawn home by the woman who had captured his heart. Nora's bakery became the finest in the territory. People traveled from miles around to taste her pastries, but she never forgot where she came from or who had helped her get there. She hired other women who had been cast aside by society widows who needed income, unwed mothers who needed respect, anyone who had been told they were less than they were. 2 years into their marriage, Nora gave birth to a daughter. They named her Catherine, after Nora's mother, and she had James's dark eyes and Nora's gentle spirit. 3 years later came a son, Samuel, named for Nora's father, who inherited his grandfather's strength and his mother's gift for baking. On the 10th anniversary of the night James had kicked in the door, Nora stood in front of her bakery, the largest building on Main Street now, with Whitfield's Bakery painted across the front in gold letters. But it was the smaller sign beneath that meant the most to her. For the man from the mountains who broke the door for me. James came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Catherine and Samuel played in the yard nearby, their laughter carrying on the autumn wind. "Do you ever regret it?" Nora asked. "Giving up the mountains for this life?" James was quiet for a moment, considering. "The mountains are still there. They'll always be there. But this you, our children, our life together, this is what I was looking for all those years. I just didn't know it until I met a woman brave enough to bring tarts to a feast that didn't want her." Nora leaned back against his chest. "We've come a long way from that night." "We have. But you know what hasn't changed?" "What?" "Those tarts are still the best thing I've ever tasted. Well, second best." He kissed the top of her head. "Your love beats even your baking." Nora laughed and turned in his arms. "Charmer, only for you." That evening, as they always did on the anniversary, they held an open house at the bakery. Anyone could come, regardless of their means, and enjoy food and fellowship. Nora made sure there was plenty for everyone, and no one was ever turned away from her door. Young people came to hear the story of how Nora and James met, of the door that was broken and the love that was built from the fragments. Nora always ended the story the same way. If someone ever opened a door for you, don't forget to open the door for the next person. We all need someone to believe in us when we can't believe in ourselves. Years passed. Catherine grew up to become a teacher, carrying her mother's compassion into a different calling. Samuel took over the bakery when Nora's hands grew too stiff with arthritis to knead dough, expanding it further and training the next generation of bakers. James's hair turned silver and his beard grew white as mountain snow. But his eyes still lit up when he looked at Nora, and his hand still found hers across the table during meals. On their 35th wedding anniversary, Nora and James sat on the porch of the house they'd built together, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their grandchildren played in the yard, and the scent of fresh bread drifted from the bakery down the street where Samuel was closing up for the day. "Did you ever imagine this?" Nora asked. "All those years ago when you kicked in that door?" James smiled. "I imagined helping a woman who deserved better than she was getting. I imagined maybe making a friend. But this?" He gestured at the life they'd built, the family they'd created, the legacy of kindness they'd established. "This exceeds anything I could have dreamed." "I was so afraid that night," Nora admitted, "standing outside that door, hearing them laugh while I stood in the cold. I thought it might break me. But it didn't. No, because you showed me that one person's cruelty doesn't define you, and one person's kindness can change everything." James took her hand, rough fingers intertwining with hers. "We changed each other, Nora. You showed me that a man could find peace without solitude. That love was worth more than freedom. That home wasn't a place, it was a person." Nora rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. After all these years, she still marveled at the journey that had brought them here. A locked door, a broken bolt, and a mountain man who saw past her exterior to the person within. "I love you, James Morgan," she said softly. "I love you too, Nora Morgan, from the mountains to the valley and every mile between." Inside the house, Catherine called them for dinner. Their family was gathering children and grandchildren, friends and neighbors who had become like family. The table Nora and James had once sat at alone now groaned under the weight of food and fellowship. As they rose to join the celebration, James pulled Nora close for one more kiss. It was sweet and familiar and filled with the promise of all the days yet to come. The door to their home stood open wide, welcoming everyone who needed a place to belong. And somewhere in the evening air, carried on the autumn wind, was the scent of apples and cinnamon and love that had been baked into every recipe, every tart, every moment of the life they had built together. The feast had tried to lock Nora out, but James had broken down the door, and in doing so, he had opened both their hearts to a love that would sustain them through all the seasons of their lives. This was the story that would be told for generations in farewell, the story of the woman who was rejected and the man who refused to accept that rejection. The story of how kindness can shatter barriers and how love can transform everything. And every year, on the anniversary of that fateful night, the bakery gave away free tarts to anyone who needed them. Because Nora never forgot what it felt like to stand outside in the cold, and she made sure that no one else would ever have to face that alone. The sign above the bakery remained, a testament to the moment that changed two lives forever. For the man from the mountains who broke the door for me. But to those who knew them, the real testament was visible every day in the way James looked at Nora, the way Nora smiled at James, and the way they walked through life hand in hand, having found in each other exactly what they'd been searching for all along.